and welcome to Channel 16. I'm Dimitri St. Jar, and today I'd like to welcome Miss Jeanette Albert, our superintendent, and our assistant superintendent, Miss Giselle Dion, to the studio. Welcome, and we're here to discuss our school's budget. So, I'd like to start with you, Miss Albert. You are a retiring student, and you've taken on many roles in our education system, and Miss Giselle Dion, who is my current chemistry teacher, is going to be taking your place as superintendent. Would you like to discuss these changes?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you for having us here, Dimitri. I've been in education. I've been involved in education for over 30 years, 35 plus years. I actually started when I was in high school with tutor students down at the elementary school, and that really got my blood going. That's what I wanted to be, an educator. I started my career up in Fort Kent. I taught in Fort Kent for a while. Then when I came back to Madawaska, I was a second grade teacher. Then I became a immersion teacher. Then I went to literacy specialist for a number of years. And from then, 12 years ago, I started as a curriculum coordinator. I did that for approximately 5 years. Then I was the elementary principal. And of course, then I became the superintendent 2 years ago. It's been a pleasure to do that. And it's eye-opening, the changes that have occurred in my career so far.
So I know that we are here to talk about some of the challenges in the school today. And the biggest challenge that we've been discussing at town meetings has been the budget. How is the state involved in our budget and deciding what we have?
Well, the state is involved in the sense that our funding, majority of our funding comes from the Department of Education. And the Department of Education, you've probably heard the term ED 279 floating around. I mean, I use it often. And really what the ED 279 is all about, it talks about the EPS, which is the Essential Programs and Services. And basically what the state is saying is that that is the bare minimum that you can use to run a school department. Now, when we receive our ED 279, we got our first in March, early March. What it basically does, it tells you what the amount the state is going to contribute toward education, and then it gives you another amount what the town has to contribute to receive the state funding. And I guess that the biggest thing is that it funds what they feel is essential for the students to have a well-rounded education. But again, like I had stated earlier, it's really the minimum of what that is needed. Now, in the past, oftentimes what happens is that the state gives you an amount. They tell the town, this is what you need to raise to get this amount. And it's never really enough to run a school department. So they have what we call the additional local funds. And in the past, as late as 08, 09, 2008, 2009, we had above the EPS. Madawaska contributed 26% above EPS in 08, 09. And it has steadily decreased since then. As a matter of fact, it went 26 down to 22 to 9 to 6, and then it was 4, and then it went down to 2. And last year we were actually below EPS. And one of the main reasons we were able to get below the EPS is because we had a healthy fund balance that we were able to move forward. And the reason we did that is because technically, I've been freezing the budget since I've been on board, and I'm sure if you ask your teachers, they'll tell you that they place an order for certain, and come October, November, it gets frozen because of issues that we can't anticipate. So, and then what happens is that the state dictates how the funding goes. They're called cost centers. And there are 11 cost centers, and we have no choice as how the state decides that. And as a matter of fact, I can actually tell you about our cost centers. One of the cost centers the first one is called total regular instruction. This would include the instruction at the elementary school, instruction at the middle school, and the high school. And last year, we had $2.479 million that went toward the regular instruction. This year we have $2.2474. So it's a decrease of a little over $4,000. The next cost center is our special education. Now, special education, mind you, the state basically says the average should be 15%. In Madawaska, we're over 18% currently. That pays for speech. It pays for OT, it pays for PT, it pays for all these services. And it pays for a lot of the one-on-ones. Oftentimes, we are receiving students that have an IEP, that's an individual educational plan for students, that requires that they have a one-on-one. Now, last year, our funding, we had $8,052,911 earmarked for that. This year, we dropped it down to $771,000. So we dropped it a good $81,000. The next cost center is our CTE instruction, which is, you all know, is our tech center up at SAD 33. That, again, the funding for that is derived by the amount of juniors and seniors we have. The total percentage of juniors and seniors dictates what our cost is. Last year, our cost on that was $209,830, and this year it's $201,000, so roughly an $8,000 decrease. Then another cost center is called Other Instruction, and that's for your co-curricular and your sports. Last year we budgeted $117,385. This year we're down a little, $116,449. The next cost center would be student and staff support. Now that entails our guidance counselors at both buildings, our health services, the nurse, our tech department in both buildings, the improvement of instruction, staff training, and our library services. Last year we had budgeted $478,609. This year we have an increase. We're at $498,556. That's an increase of $20,000. I believe that with the new requirements from the state and training and all that has caused that to increase a bit. The next cost center is the system administration, which would be considered my office, the superintendent's office, as well as the school committee. We last year had budgeted $326,589. This year we're down $320,333. So it's a decrease of $6,256. The next cost center is the school administration, which would be the principal's office, Mr. Anderson's office and Mr. Sierra's office up at the elementary. Last year we had budgeted $384,203. This year we're at $387,401. So that's a decrease of it's an increase of $3,198. The next one is transportation. Now that's the one that really is not funded enough from the state as far as the northern Maine is concerned. If you talk to our neighbors, they feel the same way. We have so many outlining little areas to pick up students, so it's very costly for us to do that versus if you're in a community like Bangor or Augusta and Portland, where everything's kind of close, the cost is not as expensive. So our transportation last year, we spent $536,928. This year, we've decreased it by $108,000. We're down to $428,889. Now, let me tell you that one of the reasons of that is, number one, there was a bus that was purchased, and we got that money back. Number two is that oftentimes we don't know what our bus runs are going to look like. So sometimes I may have a driver driving 5 hours a day versus 4 hours a day. So the state is so strict in that, is that if I hire somebody that drives 5 hours, I have to report that he's 5 hours driving, 3 hours custodian. So that's why those numbers tend to fluctuate year by year. Our facility maintenance, which would be our custodians, our capital renovation, for example over here, the new biomass system, that was $766,000 last year. It's up this year to $855,000. That's an increase of $88,000. Again, what happened, you notice I just had talked to you about a $108,000 decrease. Now we have an increase, a shifting of hours from driving to building. The next item is our debt service, which was the elementary school. Last year was our last payment, or I should say this year was our last payment, $308,105. Next year it's a zeroed out. So that's nice that we're done that. And of course, the very last cost center is our food service. And our food service last year we had budgeted $95,758. This year we're down to $80,330. Which is a $15,000 decrease. So overall, our total budget went from $6,556,231 to $6,135,486. A decrease of $427,445. So that's just a quick little brief view of what the ED 279 is all about. It's all broken up by cost centers, and you know, how many of you have had subs this year? I mean, a lot of you have had substitutes coming in and out. I mean, I think the school department has had 3 babies born to this district, and so when someone's out on long term, that is not, the state doesn't take that into account. So when we have to pay for long term subbing, all that is all local. That has to kind of cover that. So in a nutshell, that's what the ED 279 is all about.
I'd like to add to that. These numbers from the state are largely based on our student enrollment, and our student enrollment has been diving for a couple of decades now. If I take the numbers from 1991, where we had 920 some odd students, to today, 24 years later, we're now down to about half with 458 students. And back in 91, we didn't have early childhood. Now we have the addition of early childhood. So we're roughly half of the number of students that we used to be. So of course, the formulas that are based on student enrollment are going to reflect. So when the state cuts our income or our general purpose aid, it's largely based on the number of students that we have. So population's going down in Madawaska, the demographics are changing, and one of those things is that families are smaller. So we have a lot fewer students.
Do you foresee this decline in the future? Do you think that it'll keep...
In fact, we've projected to about 2023-24, and we see it plateauing. Right now we're steady until the current kindergarten and early childhood classes come up to the high school. But those children will be in the high school in the year 2020 approximately. So we're kind of like at a plateau now for a few years, several years. But in 2020, 2021, I think we'll see another big difference in enrollment.
And I want to kind of piggyback off what Ms. Dion just said. When we talk about student decline of student enrollment, we've also had a huge decline in staffing. And, you know, we went in 1991, we had 7 administrators, we're down to 3. Your teaching staff went from 68 teachers to 36, that's half right there. We don't have a vocational center here in Madawaska. We used to have a voc program here. That's gone, so we had 4 teachers then. And we used to have ed techs in practically all the elementary classrooms. I don't know if you remember that, if you had that then, but we went from 16 ed techs down to 6. Our custodians, we've cut 4. So there's, you know, we've also adjusted our staff numbers as the student enrollment have decreased.
So how do you plan to deal with this decrease in student enrollment? So do you have a plan for this?
Some of the things that we're doing is, for example, in the science department. I'm leaving the science department this year. My position will not be replaced. Half of that position was not replaced last year, and half will not be replaced this year. So through attrition, as a person retires or changes jobs, we're not replacing staff. So that's one way to cut down. In addition, in the science department, for example, chemistry and physics are going to be rotated now on a biannual schedule. So we're going to have next year all the juniors and seniors taking physics. The following year, all the juniors and seniors will be taking chemistry. So by doing that, the students will still get the same education, but we're being a little bit creative with our schedule so that we didn't have to hire and replace my position, for example.
And if you noticed, if you've heard anything, but at the elementary school, what we've done, we've last year combined grades 5 and 6. So we had, instead of having a class of 10 and a class of 14, and a class of 19 and 18, we turned around and combined the 4 classes into 3. So our 5th and 6th graders were meshed together, and there was a class size of 19 each. Now, that being said, when it came to math, they have a power math hour at the elementary school. They were in the class that was fitting where their level was at, okay? It was basically tracking their levels. When it came to the language arts, 5th grade had language arts with a 5th grade teacher, and we had a Title I teacher that we were able to use to be the other 6th grade teacher. But when it came to the science, social studies, and French, what we did is that this year they worked on the 6th grade curriculum. Next year they'll work on the 5th grade. So those science, French, and social studies will always rotate on a 2-year. Basically what Mrs. Dion just said about chemistry and that. Next year, 3rd and 4th are going to be doing the same thing. We're combining our 3rd and 4th grade. So we're being creative in getting our staff and getting our students together. You know, there's nothing says that we can't help our communities also, where we're even looking at sharing services if we have to. You know, whether we look at the Tamberg system and whatnot for coursework. But
one of the cost centers that Mrs. Albert pointed out a while ago increased, I think, by 20,000 or so, and that was the one that supports professional development. And she mentioned that the state is now mandating a lot of other requirements that we didn't used to have to do. So our staff has to go through retraining, and one of the things that we've done is we've joined a collaborative out of Presque Isle, NEMIC, and Northern Maine Educational Collaborative. And that's helped us save a lot on professional development. We'll go up there with teams of teachers where all the schools in the valley, and the county actually, are gathered, and we're sharing in those costs. So I think the school department is doing as best as they can with the limited resources that they've been getting for professional development. But that's probably an area that we need to focus on.
So it seems student enrollment is definitely a big factor when it comes to budgets.
Absolutely.
Naturally so. And are there other factors involved in deciding our budget?
Well, what happens is that it doesn't, the ED 279, or what we're talking about, doesn't take into the account the unfunded mandates. And what I mean by unfunded mandates is when we're talking about, here's an example. Chapter 24 is the newest mandate coming down the pike. It states that you're going to have an early childhood program, and in that early childhood program, the maximum amount of students in the class is 16, and it has to be an 8-to-1 ratio, which means you can only have one adult for every 8 students. The Chapter 24 also says that you have to have at least 35 square feet per child space-wise. You have to have running water in the room, and you have to have a bathroom, preferably. So, when this came down, I went up to the elementary school, and Mr. Sirwa and I went to visit the classroom that they're currently in, and to make sure that if I had 16 students in that classroom, would we have the correct amount of total square footage, which we do have. And we do have water in that room, we do have a laboratory, so we're safe in that sense. But again, it's an unfunded mandate that says we have to have, and the Ed Tech has to be an Ed Tech 2, it can't be an Ed Tech 1. So again, that's what we call unfunded mandates. They're saying you need to do this, but we're not going to give you any money for it. You need to go to proficiency-based education, but we're not going to give you any money for it.
In fact, just recently in the news, we heard that funding in Maine is going to increase in education, so they're going to give more on one hand, but on the other hand, they're going to cut those very centers that were providing a little bit of money. So we're going to tell you have to do it, but we're not going to give you the money to do it. Solve it yourself.
Right.
So would that balance out? They're going to give you money, but they're going to take away money?
We don't even know how much the state is going to increase yet, so it's difficult to judge. It's a moving target.
What the state has done, in the past, but they look at the town evaluation. That's another component on figuring out the funding. Enrollment is a big one, but the town evaluation is another big one. If they say your town is valued at, let's say, $100 million, for example. Well, they're saying if your town is evaluated at $100 million, in the past you'd just say, well, you should have 8.1 times is what you should be contributing to an education. So 8.1 times $100 million would have been $81,000. Well, now they've changed their formula to say that it's 8.48. So they've increased that. So it's increasing the town's requirement for education. And they used to take the current valuation. Well, now they've decided that they're going to average out the last 3 years, so which hurts us in a sense. That's another thing. So it keeps changing, and all the little changes that are happening are not helping us. They're hurting us more than anything else.
Aside from the unfunded mandates, too, we've had a lot of unanticipated expenses, and one of the bigger ones was the virtual school that the state of Maine has now approved, and has approved another virtual school. But when you have a student or 2 or 3 or 4 that leaves your enrollment numbers and joins the virtual school, which is based out of the Portland area, their funding for those students goes with them. Not just a portion, but the entire funding for that student that came from the state now follows them. Now, as you know, a virtual school doesn't have a cafeteria, doesn't have bricks and walls and electricity to pay and water and transportation costs. But all of that, even the small pieces that would have been for that student in those particular cost centers, follows that child. So this year, we lost for the equivalent of 4 students with all those costs. So that's another factor. There are other unfunded or And unanticipated expenses.
Yeah, and that hurt us this year. You heard me say earlier that, last year we balanced forward a huge amount. We balanced forward $390,000. This year, because of these unanticipated expenditures, you had a biomass boiler here that had to be refractured. And for those of you out there who don't know, I didn't know what it was myself, but it's the bricks inside there that broke, so they had to be redone. The virtual school that Mrs. Yen was making reference to. 20-year-old tractor up at the elementary school, we had to do repairs on that. Our buses are a very old fleet. We've had to do quite a bit of repairs on that. So this is all extra money that was not budgeted last year that we had to take care of this year. One of the biggest costs that we incurred was when Twin Rivers changed, they changed their insurance, so a lot of the employees' husbands came onto the Madawaska School Department's plan, so that we had to cover them. We had no choice. So that was something that was not anticipated and was not budgeted. So that kind of hurt us in a sense.
One of the pieces that's going to affect us in the coming budget is the way the calendar year falls. Something as simple as how the month of July starts. That is causing 27 payrolls in the next year instead of 26. So for our school year employees, the year-round employees, not the school year, the year-round employees will have 27 payrolls, which is one more than normal. Well, just that cost factor is $20,000 some odd dollars. So that is an increase in our budget that we have no control over, but these people have to be paid. They will be working their weeks. So it's not that we have an extra week in the year, it's just the way the payroll is falling because of how July is. So there's always surprises, there's always unanticipated things happening, and you deal with them.
Mm-hmm. The money you mentioned earlier that is for each individual student that then goes to a virtual school, does that money go to that school in Portland? Does it fund it?
It does. And that school in Portland is actually a piece of a much larger corporation. And it's called Connections Academy, which actually belongs to Pearson, which is a huge education company. They produce textbooks, they produce programs, and their home office in the States, I believe, is in Maryland. So we're sending money to Portland through the State Department. Portland's sending it to Maryland, and Pearson is based out of England. So it's actually going out of state, out of country, not just out of Aroostook. So yeah, it's pretty big.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to share, Miss Albert?
Yeah, just one more thing. I know that last year when we were in the town meeting, a lot of the concerns that the community had was the cost of insurance. Why is it so expensive to insure? And so that was one of the tasks that they gave us, that they wanted us to look at the insurance. And we did. I want to let them know that all teachers, administrators, anybody not covered by the EPS contract have had a cut of 22% benefit cut. That is a good chunk. Some lost $8,000 of benefits by reducing what we're paying toward insurance. The support staff have not had that cut because their contract is currently in force for another year. But that was one of the things the town had tasked us to do, and that was to cut insurance. So we did. We saved, by reducing everybody by 22%, we've saved roughly $145,000. So it's been a big chunk.
Good. Ms. Yen?
I would like to close by just discussing a little bit that we had a resource committee that was formed out of community members last fall. Mr. Lester Willett, a former superintendent and former principal, led that committee, and it was a good group of community people that worked diligently for several months. And they created recommendations for the entire community, not just the school, but also the community, the town office and other areas. But the one recommendation that they gave the school is to address declining enrollment. And they recommended on their recommendation that we should immediately put to work a committee that would examine the declining enrollment, that would look at the feasibility of our buildings, to look at what we can do for staffing, consolidation with other schools, or regionalization, reviewing our programs, what are we doing for staffing. I just want to say that in the past 5 or 6 months that we've been tasked to do this, we've worked diligently, and there's still a lot of work to do, but It can't happen overnight. Had we started to study the declining enrollment and acted on it 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. It's going to take several years, and as we mentioned, the enrollment, the population is kind of steady for several years, and then it's going to take another dip. So we're working hard. It's going to continue, and we just hope that the community will be patient with what we're trying to do.
Okay. I'd like to thank you both for coming here and talking about this very important issue, especially it affects everybody in this building, definitely. This is Dimitri St. Jar. This is Channel 16, signing out.